I appreciate all of you coming this morning and taking time out, especially those of you that are not in my marketing class. My name is Rusty Brooks, and so we've got several student groups in here, two of my marketing classes, some from our honors college, some graduate students, some alumni, and then some invited friends come by to hear our guest speaker today. On your way in, Carrie Martin passed out to you sort of a brief bio on Thomas Seitz, so you'd have a little bit of information about him. And rather than going back through the data that you saw, many of us would be happy to have excelled in one career by the time that we pass on to meet our Maker. Few of us have the opportunity to excel in two careers, but as you can tell by the bio, Thomas Seitz has excelled in several careers, starting as an engineer, eventually getting his doctorate and moving on to being a professor, then an author, then an innovator and an entrepreneur, and is based on what he's told me, he still has some businesses back in Germany that his overworked partner takes care of, but he's at that stage in his career. And then he moved to McKinsey and Company, and you'll see some bio information about McKinsey. And not only is he one of their special consultants in the oil and gas area and to some extent technical areas in computer science, but he's also the director of the Houston office, and in fact also the director of the southern region for McKinsey and Company, which stretches all the way from Atlanta here to Houston. And so he also certainly has the talent of being a manager, and that's a several-pronged type of career path that he's followed. And as you'll see when he gets up here, it's not like a complete geezer like Dr. Burke back there, so he still has some lifeblood left in him, so we don't know what new career he may be following after that. But if hard-pressed, since I know him on a personal level more than as a professional level, for all those various careers and the excellence that he's done, there's one special career that he continues with that probably, to him personally, is probably the best of his accomplishments, and that is that he's an outstanding dad and husband. He has 4 children, and he is a mentor and a teacher and a best friend to those kids. And that's probably his best God-given talent, is being an excellent father. And so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Herr Professor Dr. Thomas Seitz.
Good morning, and Dr. Brooks or Rusty, thank you so much for your very kind introduction. Purposefully, I'll stay down here. I think that is much more appropriate for me. And thank you very much for inviting me to this beautiful space and to your beautiful campus. You should be proud to be at this beautiful place. It's a gorgeous chapel, and it's a gorgeous campus. And if you would know all the different academic facilities I've seen over the course of my life, you would appreciate this within the top 5%, which you probably have no view for this, but if you go to Asia, if you go to Europe, we don't have those facilities. We should be very grateful for what we have here and appreciative. I want to talk with you today about McKinsey. Not sure whether I'm going to do it energetic enough, but I'll try my best. And I want to talk with you about consulting, because I believe this might be something that you haven't heard much about and that might be of interest to you or could be of interest to you. Has anybody here heard about McKinsey in this class? I know Dr. Brooks probably made you study and look this up a little bit, but just for the purpose of what is consulting, where it comes from, give you a little bit of background, then I do actually have a presentation going through what McKinsey does and how we do it, and I brought something that is very, very recent from our Global Partner Conference, where all of our global partners get together once a year. That happened 2 weeks ago, and we talked about what we see as the biggest 5 trends going forward in the next decade. This is confidential, hasn't gotten to the outside. Some of our largest clients have seen pieces of it, but nobody on the outside has seen the 5 themes, so you're going to be the first ones to see it from the outside. It's pretty interesting and somewhat provocative. There's an element of energy in there, which I'm always delighted to talk a lot about, given that that's the reason what got me here to Houston. But there are lots of other themes that I do believe will be much more important for you than they actually are for me. So before I start with all of that and start talking, curious whether you are interested about anything in particular, anything you would like to learn in the next hour from me. Or should I just be quiet? Don't say anything?
Say anything about energy in Brazil.
Okay. Okay, I'd love to do that. Happy to. Any other topic that would be of interest?
Definitely interested in biofuels.
We can easily link those two. Brazil is the largest biofuels producer in the world and will be on a going forward basis. Other questions? Topics? Cap and trade. Oh, that's a very interesting political topic that you don't see in the newspaper yet, but it will come up very, very clearly in the next couple of weeks as the Obama administration is moving from healthcare towards other pastures, and one of which is going to be energy, and cap and trade is an important piece in that. So I got those three. Let me try to mingle those into the different topics I want to briefly present to you. I want to talk to you about consulting for one very simple reason. When I was a student, at your tenures, I had no idea of what that is. I didn't even know that there's a whole industry of consulting, and I didn't know about the value of services from an outsider that can be provided to institutions, both to corporations as well as government institutions alike, and add a lot of value. And there are three main reasons why you actually use consulting services, which is a huge industry globally. One of which is you want to get an independent perspective, independent of what you have in your own company. The second key driver is you need knowledge that you don't have in your own corporation or in your institution. And we're serving the world's largest institutions. Literally, go down the Fortune 500 list, 95% of those 500 companies we are serving globally, and usually at the very top of those companies. And you would assume that a company that employs more than 4 million people, there's actually one of those companies in this country, would have all the resources they need. But they don't, because they don't know what's happening in other industries. So the value of bringing that knowledge into an institution is actually quite tremendous. And the third thing, which is pretty interesting and happens to us probably more frequently than we like, there are instances where companies, corporations, governments, or other institutions need surge capacity and get something done very, very quickly. To give you an idea, when two of the largest companies merged, when Exxon bought Mobil, or when BP acquired Amoco and Arco, those were huge transactions with thousands of people involved. Having somebody who knows how to integrate those companies is absolutely essential, having the methodology. But you just need people to get it all done as well. So we are doing some of that on a very frequent basis. It's about 10 to 20% of what we do. So three reasons why you would actually use a consultant. One reason to actually be a consultant is I find it absolutely fascinating. And you'll hear some of that when I go quickly through my presentation. Nobody would have to pay me for what I'm doing. And if there's one advice I can give you today, find work that is pleasure to you, and you will never have to work in your life. That's an old Chinese proverb, but there's a lot of truth in it. And thinking through what you really like and really enjoy, if you can make a profession out of it, that's true fun. I have fun working with the most interesting people, always humbled whenever I see them. I have a lot of fun solving the world's most interesting problems. I'll give you a few of those in a minute. So let me talk first about McKinsey a little bit, and it's just 3 slides to give you some facts so you know actually where I come from and what McKinsey is. There are probably not even a handful of global strategic consulting firms, most of which go back to the early 1910s, 1920s. Some of the later ones in the 60s and 70s were founded. We are by far the largest with the most global network and the most different setup than any of the other companies. You might have heard names like Boston Consulting Group, Bain and Company, or Booz and Hamilton. All of those were more recently founded and have a little bit of a different aspect of the consulting services in them. They are not as much a partnership as we believe we are a partnership, And all three of those together are about our size, and that has been true for the last 20 years, just to give you a little bit of a notion. We have today about 9,000 consultants globally in 88 offices. Literally every big city around the world where there are corporations or important governments, we are in there. We were the first ones in Russia, we were the first ones in China, we were the first ones in Europe. As you hear from my funny accent, that's where I'm coming from. So this is truly a global firm with global citizens, and we actually do appreciate the international nature of our colleagues a lot, and do believe that diversity is not only here to stay, but here to make us more powerful and have more impact. Now, I mentioned a few things about whom we are serving from the Fortune 500 list. What I do think is actually more interesting is we serve about 40 different national governments around the world. Some of them in a way that you'd be surprised. Many of the market mechanisms that you see today in Asia, both on the banking side, that actually helped Asia to be stable, as well as on the commodity trading side, were developed by us over the last 20 years. Stock exchanges, all the electronic stock exchanges, the first one actually in Frankfurt was developed by my colleagues. The idea actually came up for my colleagues to do an electronic stock exchange. All of that is based there. Some of the commodity tradings that you can do today, like aluminum and copper, our friends in London invented literally, it didn't exist before, and created that stock exchange. We serve 80 of the Fortune's most admired all-star companies, and 90 of the Forbes 100 leading global companies. You know, everybody has this list. So just assume that if there's a big name, the likelihood that we've served them at some point in time is very, very high. We have about 20,000 people, alumni across all sectors, many of them CEOs, many of them entrepreneurs, others of them working in the private equity industry. Quite a few of them have gotten to fame, or the opposite actually as well. So we have lots of stories of our alumni, what they've done and where they've gone to. We are proud of many, not of all of them. So that's just a brief snapshot. I thought it might be interesting to just give you a roster of here's the kind of work we do, and it's as diverse as what you see here. It is just a lot more. To give you an idea, at any point in time, we have around 2,000 engagements going on around the world. So, for example, helping cities to design their public transportation infrastructure, two very big projects in China, where we've helped with that from the very early stages to a late stage. Understand that was for a large corporation what to do around biofuels, how important it is, and how to prepare yourself. We helped as well and actually had done a whole host of studies in Asia around AIDS and malaria. In particular, you probably have heard a lot about AIDS, but malaria is one of those diseases which is just outright terrible. And our colleagues have worked with the biggest pharma companies in the world to bring existing pharma products on a cost basis to Africa, and have worked with large foundations like the Gates Foundations and the Dell Foundation to actually fund the transfer of those medications. If you hear the sheer numbers that I'm always very humbled by, because I'm not fortunate enough to be in an industry where I can do these things, but I'm very humbled what my colleagues have done there. They've reduced in many regions malaria disease and actually the terrible outcome of malaria, final deaths, from a likelihood of more than 90% to less than 5%. If you think about having an impact just on one life, to me that is just very, very humbling to think about what you can do here. And it's actually interesting that there was a huge celebration when those numbers came up from the pharma companies who didn't know what they could be doing with their resources. And I think at the end, everybody was very proud to come together for this greater good. Let me briefly talk a little bit about what we do and how we do it, so you get a bit of a frame of how consulting works. You usually have a team that is on site with a client, working closely together with the client, so you can help build the capabilities as well as bring the knowledge into that client situation. And the end result is not a report or a document or something that you put back into the shelf, but the end result is often a system or model where you have created something that is then used by the client on a going forward basis. And the team that does this is a team that consists out of a business analyst, that is somebody who would actually, after his first degree, join us. Someone who is an associate, those are people who have an MBA or a PhD, or like me, couldn't stop studying and have just far too many degrees. And then you have an engagement manager, which is an associate after a couple of years, then leading a team together with the client. And we have a partner who is actually in charge of the direction of the work and responsible for the work. So that is the overall setup. We are the world's largest, and as other people say, probably most prestigious partnership in the world, with 1,200 partners all around the world. Those 1,200 partners completely own the firm, which is fantastic because you are an owner as a partner. Some of you might appreciate that, others might not, but if you own something, it gives you a little bit of a different feel about your own entity and your own firm compared to somebody else having the shares and telling you what to do, which gives you a lot of very nice flexibility and a lot of freedom. So that's as much as I wanted to tell you about McKinsey and what we do. I do actually think it's more interesting to give you a little bit of a snapshot. How will the future look like? Always love these crystal ball things. And then I will address both the question around Brazil, so you'll be prepared when you go down there, as well as combine that with the biofuels question. So what happens next? 5 important themes that I believe will be important for you to watch out for. One is we will see a great rebalancing. Sounds pretty interesting. I'll tell you later on what we actually mean by great rebalancing. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there is a big productivity imperative. And your teachers probably have seen this. I've been amazed to see how the textbooks have advanced and how teaching has changed over the last years. I'm not sure how much you've seen around it, but if you think about what you have to learn today, just productivity-wise, compared to what you had to learn 20 years ago, it's a whole different ballgame. And it's true for accounting, it's true for marketing, it's true for strategy, for business, but it's true for science as well. In biology, literally every 5 years, you should write a new textbook, given what's coming out of research in biology, which makes this really, really challenging. So welcome to a world of constant learning and productivity enhancement. By the way, that shouldn't scare you. It's actually a lot of fun. Once you get into it, you'll see it. If you're in your beginning of your studies, you'll start appreciating it at the end of your studies. I know we have a few graduate students. You hopefully appreciate it more. You know, it won't stop, just to be clear about it. Another key topic is the global grid. We do believe the world is becoming more global, and I have a few interesting facts around this. Pricing the planet, what we are doing with and to our planet will get a price more and more. That is not just true for energy, that is true for water and many other resources because we are simply running out of them. And as the population is growing, we're running out of them faster. And then the last thing we call the market state, which is nothing else but this is actually a very dynamic place over the next 10, 20 years. And in the next decade, you will see a market for things. And the market will clear certain transactions and will determine how the world is going to behave. And although governments are intervening, and we've just seen that over the last couple of years very intensely, the market at the end of the day, we believe, will work and bring things back to order because it's hard to resist on a very long basis. Let's talk about the great rebalancing. Some of that you might have heard in the news. Some of the facts might be a little interesting. Let's look at the contribution to global real gross domestic product growth by non-OECD countries. So the non-developed countries, non-OECD countries, gross domestic product is basically all the stuff you're producing. And how has that changed? And it has changed from less than 50% until 2008. For the next decade, more than half of what will be produced out of those countries. Just to be clear, the table is turning. With that, the power axis is turning. And it's turning from us towards Asia, where most of that is happening. Look at the share of the global GDP, EU, non-Japan, Asia. In 2010, Asia is creeping up to the EU on the GDP side. In 2025, Asia will be more important than the EU on a just pure production basis. Look at the world urban population. We had 13% in 1900 living in urban centers. In 2010, this year, for the first time ever, there are more people living in urban centers than outside of urban centers. By the way, we still count as urban here. So although it feels sometimes a little suburban, this is all urban. But in 2030, this is just going up. 60% will live there. Let's do a little bit of a guessing game. In China, over the next 10 years, building of 60 stories and higher, how many are being built per day? One, half a building, 10% of a building. So again, buildings, 60 stories and higher in China over the next 10 years. How many buildings per day? Any guess? 2? Per day. Yeah, so we don't have that much population there. But 2 was close. We have 4 buildings every day, or every 3 hours, there's a new 60-story building and higher. Every 3 hours in China over the next 10 years, a building 60 stories and higher. To give you a little bit of an appreciation. There are cities that I can't pronounce, that I flew in and flew out and literally can't spell the name again, that have more than 5 million people. You come into the city, you haven't seen a picture of it before, it's unheard of. And by the way, 10 years ago, they show me a picture. It's like Houston was 100 years ago. It took us 100 years to build this. They're doing it in 10 years. So it's a very, very different acceleration that we are seeing. And when you look at the labor productivity growth, you see what we have in India and China. It's quite phenomenal. So we do believe there's a real global rebalancing. And just to make the point on a little bit of a detailed thing here, has anybody heard about the firm Caterpillar? Every once in a while, those nice trucks. You probably haven't heard about all the other guys there. If you look at the manufacturing equipment for construction, Caterpillar is clearly the market leader, as you see on the left-hand side. Then there's Komatsu, Liebherr, Volvo, all of those are sort of European brands. But the left brand you should have heard because it's a pretty US and global brand. Now, when you don't look at revenue, but when you look at units, who's building most of the units right now in 2008, actually, it's already 2 years old. They're names that I hadn't even heard about before. Longqing, Liugong, all of those Chinese manufacturers producing more units than Caterpillar, all for the domestic market. By the way, do you have any appreciation? Do you think they will stay in China for the next 10 or 20 years? All of those will come here. By the way, production cost of one of those on the left-hand side is not even 10% of the Caterpillar units. We studied this for one of those market leaders on the left-hand side, and we're probably more scared than we've been scared for a long time when we saw this. That somebody's producing a volume much bigger than the world market leader, and nobody even knows about it, is pretty fascinating. So much about the global rebalancing. So there's something very significantly changing here. My recommendation to you, if you do have a chance to get to Asia, understand better what's going on there, read about it, learn about it, it will be your reality. It will be mine as well, but it will be yours for a longer period of time. Next topic, the productivity imperative. Let's look at some numbers. Contribution of every dollar of US GDP growth. In 1970s, most of it was actually from employment growth. Only 20% was driven every US dollar by labor productivity growth. In 2010, it's only 30% employment growth, which, by the way, we understand because we don't see employment growing. And we haven't seen that over the last 10 years if you balance it a little bit. But labor productivity growth has contributed 70% to that $1. So most of the value that is being created today is not by having more people doing more things, but having fewer people doing things much smarter, differently, with a higher productivity. Again, it starts with learning, but it's the overall productivity chain as well. This is very important for corporations to understand it, because it means it doesn't stop. It means that you will have to continuously improve whatever you're doing. And when we talk to CEOs, we have a survey that we do once a year. The number one thing that every CEO agrees over the next 5 years they will change is their business processes. the number one thing they will change is their business processes. Which, by the way, means once you start working in any of those corporations, I mean, pick them here, Exxon, BP, Shell, just pick any name, the business process you will start in will definitely not be the one that you will finish in. It will very likely change even over the next 5 to 10 years once you start employment. So continuing to stay up to speed and understanding what's changing will be a huge factor and a very important factor. Now, if you look at Japan, which, as some of you might know, has been in a very difficult situation for the last at least 2 decades from a pure growth perspective, it has been shrinking on the employment side, and the only thing that actually contributed to GDP growth had been labor productivity growth. Some people say this is how the US is going to look like over the next 10 years. I do think there's some truth to it. So learning on how to be more productive is important, which then leads to the fact that we will need new kinds of jobs. For every 8 US jobs created over the last decade, we created 10 and lost 2. And we created 7 jobs in complex judgment, interactions, problem-solving jobs. So welcome to campus. You're in very good hands here. Appreciate what you're learning. Repetitive transactions, frankly, 3 were created, but we are a little worried about that part of the industry and how sustainable that is, because a significant chunk of that has been offshored. And we've lost 2 jobs in manufacturing and production. We don't really see much momentum that that picture is changing. Now, here's something that I thought might be a little difficult to read, but maybe helpful for you from a learning aspect to get used to. This is what we call a cost curve concept. What it shows on the x-axis, it's going over there, is amount of people employed in any single bucket. And on the y-axis, it shows the average wage, or the negative, if people don't work but could work, the foregone wage. So people who have been educated very well but stay home or retire and just don't want to work anymore, they're on the right-hand side of that curve, meaning they could earn something but they don't want to earn something. And this curve is just listed by wage. We can actually draw it a lot more sophisticated, and it goes more up to the left and is a little flatter, but we just grouped things together. And we said, let's take all of the ones who have less than a high school degree in the US to the very right. That is this little beige area next to the long black line, and see what they are earning and how many of them are employed. And then we take the ones who have just a high school degree, we take the college degree, and look at that, the advanced degree. Welcome to those who are graduate students. Are on the left-hand side of that curve. That's probably not big news because, you know, the wages are much better, and what is interesting as well, they have a much higher chance of being employed. However, the market pressure is on that part of the curve, and it's substantial because we don't have enough of that group. There is too much in the rest of the group, but in that group there aren't enough. So when we look at the global supply-demand, and if you look at the US supply-demand, we are missing people with higher education substantially. And we're just coming up with the estimates. You don't see that on that slide, but we expect that we need at least 20 to 30% more in that box in order to continue with the imperative on the productivity that I talked to you about a little earlier. So what does it mean? You're in good hands here. Please continue to study. This is what gets you on the left-hand side of that curve. The global grid. Lots of things we can talk about globalization, as I do see somebody here on the cell phone or on a BlackBerry. Let's just think a little bit about what we've seen, what happened. We've seen over Q1 2009 that the capital flows have dropped because of our huge issues that we had in the global economy. We've seen that the trade flows had stopped and are slowly recovering. If you would have been, I was a little bit more than a year ago in Singapore. If you were standing there on the edge of the harbor and you were looking out behind you is the skyline of Singapore, you could literally see a black line on the horizon. Anybody an idea what that black line was? It was about 2,400 ships, container ships, that harbored in Singapore, that were built but didn't have any use because there was no global goods trade. So that was pretty dismal. What we have seen, nevertheless, just to come back to the topic of the global network and how globally linked we are, we have seen an amazing change in internet-based and knowledge-based information exchange. If you just look at annual gains and flows from 2008 and 9 on Facebook memberships, global IP traffic, internet protocol traffic, it's amazing when you think about how much more data and information is being exchanged. Whether we want to, whether governments want to, this is becoming a truly global place. It is very, very easy to communicate with everybody. And some of the people in the Middle East, when I talk to some of my clients, say the biggest change they've seen over the last 2 decades is actually the amount of news and information everybody gets in the country about the outside world. By the way, most people in China, my colleagues who are serving clients, they believe that is the most explosive thing in China, that people start to understand and appreciate what's going on around in the world and will no longer sit still with the government they have there. Mobile phone subscriptions in billions, very nice numbers. By the way, most of that China and India, just to come back to that. Global IP traffic in exabytes. By the way, in my times when I studied computer science and programmed large parallel processing machines, we were talking in kilo, mega, and sometimes gigabytes, but that was sort of the aggregate dimension. So these are like different dimensions. Let me talk briefly about pricing the planet. That is my hobby, frankly. I came to Houston because of energy. I did energy before I joined McKinsey, and do believe this is one of the most fascinating topics, not just because it's intellectually very complex. Just to give you a few things and a few numbers, there's no other asset system in the world that is more complex and more capital intensive than the electric power grid around the world. There is no other commodity that actually unfortunately created more wars as well as has more impact on GDP than oil and gas. So, welcome to the hub of that, and you're sitting right in that, so appreciate it. Again, sometimes difficult to appreciate where you are. I came here with my family 12 years ago from Germany because I wanted to be in the middle of it for just a year. I liked it so much that I'm still here. So it is a very, very lucky thing that you have around you what is, and most people globally say, truly the center of the world on energy. So pricing the planet, just a few numbers for you to keep in mind. Fossil fuels will not be gone anytime soon. If you look at 2006, clean energy, 21% of the global energy usage. 2020, a whopping 1% more. So thank you very much for that. Doesn't mean it's unimportant, but on a global equation, at the end of the day, over the next decade, this is still going to be a game of fossil energy. Don't misunderstand it. However, if you look at total power capacity additions, some of those things pretty important to just keep in mind and square this away. 2,200 gigawatt is about double the capacity that we have installed right now in the US. We have about 1,000 gigawatt of electricity generation installed here, and we will add between 2006 and 2020, in just 14 years, double the capacity what we have in the US. If people know that we are the biggest consumer of electricity, you get an appreciation how much growth there is. About half of that will be from clean energy, and then the other half from fossil fuels. And you see the shares on the right-hand side. So from the clean energy, substantial part hydro, substantial part nuclear, substantial part wind, about half of that solar, although there's a lot of upside on solar, and certainly during your lifetime you will see a lot more of it. Appreciating a little bit what we do here to our planet, CO2 consumption per capita. This is a record that we are not proud of and that we need to work on. 20.6 tons of CO2 consumption per person. That's a problem, and we will start working on it, and just had the question about cap and trade. Very hard to see when and what exactly politicians will be doing. There's a high likelihood that we will have a carbon cap and trade system similar from the high-level mechanics to what has been implemented in Europe 2003. Colleagues of mine, with a little bit of my help, designed that system back then, and we've been monitoring it for the European Commission and have been working on that system substantially. We believe a similar system will enter the US as well. It has many benefits. That will make all of the carbon-using fossil fuels more expensive. So the gas pump will go up a little bit. Coal energy will be much more expensive. Now, the real problem, of course, is on that chart. This is right now. China is building a 600 megawatt coal plant every week. So just to appreciate that a little bit, every week, 600 megawatt of coal. efficiency about 31.5%, which is well below the 38 to 40% average that we have today in the US. So it's not even world-class technology that is being implemented. They simply can't afford it. But by the way, they look all the same, which, you know, I had never seen that in my life before. If you've ever seen a power plant here in the US and you go to another one, they totally look different. I mean, you go through one door and you don't know where to go next. The third plant that I visited in China, I actually could go through the control room right away. Nobody needed to show me the direction. It was all the same. There wasn't even any furniture looking different. It was all cookie cutter. Even the lights and the ceiling and the colors, they were all the same. I saw 5 of those, 5 totally the same. Doing it very differently than what we are doing, which is all customized and adjusted, and everybody does it a little bit differently. It's all standardized. Makes it very cheap, by the way. Let me talk briefly about the market state and a little bit of our trouble, and again, the ambition that we need to have and you need to have. A little bit of a different and difficult curve. Government debt as % of GDP. As you might imagine, we are producing a lot of goods, and the government can put some debt on, as we've done just recently here massively, as Europe has done recently massively. And there's so much you can actually deal with. When you look at the advanced G20 countries, over the last years, as well as the forecast 2000 to 2014, so this is Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Korea, UK, US, all of them have an increasing debt leverage against their GDP. If you take the emerging G20 countries, so this is Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey, Brazil, and look at where they are, much lower average debt levels. By the way, much less aged population, less social networks, less social support, because if you would differentiate that curve of the upper G20, Europe is actually the big driver. The US is still okay on that because the social network in Europe is very, very costly. So what we see if we don't generate more GDP, supporting those social networks will be increasingly difficult, if not yet impossible. And we've seen some of the beginnings of that. You've seen elements of that in particular, Italy. Greece has become more famous, but probably not just for that reason. Spain and Portugal have exactly the same issues. Now, that will make those other countries much more dynamic and faster. And we believe that is something to watch out for because we believe in market-driven economies. So this will be an advantage for those who deal with it in the right way and a disadvantage for those who burden the economy in the wrong way. So I've come to the end of my quick overview. Let me just give you these drivers. We have a lot more facts and a lot more we can talk about, but I thought this might be somewhat interesting, give you a little bit of a snapshot what is actually going on around in the world. And I try to give you a few messages in between that might be helpful to you to keep in mind and might help you along the way as you're thinking about your professional career and what you would enjoy doing. Let me briefly talk a little bit about the energy industry, which is at a huge inflection point. We have many paradigms that have changed over the last decade, and some of that actually got lost within the global recession. We did lose in the global recession. People forget that about a year ago, to be exact, 14 months ago, oil price was at $40. We're now back in the, well in the 80s plus, with actually an upward pressure on oil price. But all of that is driven by a few simple facts. Whether you read in the newspaper on a day-to-day basis something else, that is possible. But in general, it's getting much more expensive to find, extract, and produce crude oil, simply because we've taken what's easy to get. And when you read about some of the things that are being done today to actually produce oil, it gets a little bit to the edge of, tell me that story again. I mean, we are pumping chemicals into those reservoirs to get the last drop of oil out. Really ugly chemicals, by the way. They pop at certain pressures and certain temperatures to do exactly what we want them to do. Technically, we are really good, so we can do this. But so, you know, at some point in time, there are not too many drops to squeeze out. We are going down into 7,000 meter depth and drilling another 5, sometimes even 8,000 meters below the surface of the ocean to find the next big reservoirs. Yes, there might be a few more out there, but you're getting a little bit to the limits of what you can do technically. Once you see one of those drilling rigs, you actually are awed. I'm always humbled when I'm on one of the rigs about what these wonderful engineers and people do. I mean, it's unbelievable under what conditions they have to work and under what conditions we are trying to not only find oil, but extract it. I mean, you do have 10-yard high waves, and you're drilling in those. You need to keep that boat somehow stable. I mean, I got on that rig, flown in by helicopter. We were looking at some of the newest exploration data, and I was sick immediately just standing on that ship. And the people were working there, and not only were working there, they were working pretty much 24/7 for 4 weeks in a row to do what we have to do to get the last drop of oil. Now, 80% of the resources are in the hands of national oil companies, relatively easy to extract, so some of that is still there. But I'm not sure if anybody of you had been to Lagos in Nigeria. I've been there, unfortunately, a few too many times. You do fear that a bullet is hitting you. And it is not a very healthy environment, which is why there is still oil around that is relatively easy to extract. Demand is outstripping supply, and while in the US we hopefully will reduce our imports of oil substantially, just Asia alone will ensure that we will have global growth in oil, no matter what we do. In China, oil demand, as we figured out for one of our clients, is actually not driven by normal economics, but by behavioral economics. We are missing in China, that might be a little funny for you guys to understand, we're missing in China about as many ladies in the age between 18 and 25, we call this, people could get married in that age group, as all of the Central European countries have combined women of that age. So take France, Italy, Germany, all of them together, take all the women, that's what's missing in China because of their birth policy. I mean, it's not only that you could only have one child, funny enough, all of them ended up to be males. We have a real problem because those males need cars. If they don't have cars, they don't get women. It's that simple. We did some marketing assessment, and we were all astonished about those principles. And if you look at car demand in China, it's quite outrageous. That correlation is fully there. Married couples don't need a car anymore, but all the single men all try whatever it takes to get a car, which is why we see not only huge growth in car sales in China, but of course all of the oil products that you need to drive around with that car is coming up as well, which is where China needs a lot of resources. So, we will see growth sometimes from very different demand patterns than we were used to. So that's a real problem. We did find natural gas here in the US, which helps tremendously, but even that one will be limited for a certain period of time. Now, Brazil is close. We briefly wanted to mention Brazil, and there's lots of resources in Brazil, partially as well because Petrobras, the national oil company, wasn't able to extract all of that over the years, didn't have the technical skills, which is why we still have a lot of resources at a relatively low seabed level to be extracted. They have the biggest biofuels opportunities, given that the sugarcane growth that you can achieve in Brazil is just unbelievable from a pure rate perspective. We've seen some joint ventures, some movements lately. We do have a pretty significant indirect import tax of ethanol from Brazil into the US right now with about 50 cents, which is prohibitive to not get more biofuels from Brazil into the US, but we will see a lot more. This will be a very important topic. And there's another technology coming up which will allow you to not just take sugarcane and convert it into biofuels in a very efficient and CO2 efficient way, because everything else today is actually not very efficient. To transfer corn into biofuels, I would actually argue whether we should really do this or not, and would strongly argue with you not to do it. Sugarcane makes all the sense of the world, has to do with the cellulosic material of sugarcane and the ability to actually dissect it from a pure, simple ethanol process. But there are new processes that have been developed, by the way, from technologies that come out of the pharma industry. The way that the pharma industry has organically produced lots of their medication, in particular cancer drugs, has been through enzymes. And those enzyme technologies are now getting into the biofuels area and starting to be commercialized. That will allow us to take forestry products and other things and actually convert them into biofuels. Will this help? Yes. Will this make a difference? No. Yeah, I think there's a question of what is the most effective land use and what is the most fertile ground for certain crops to grow. And it is just so much more fertile and so much more advantageous in Brazil to grow it if you compare this to any other biomass. That it wouldn't make much sense if you look at it from a global basis. If you look at it from a just local basis, there are some advantages of growing a lot more sugar. I mean, there's a good reason that this is close to sugarland. We did have very significant sugar growth here. But just to be clear, we don't have any more sugar here, and even the sugar factory is closed now for a very simple reason. If you look at the global agriculture curve, the global cost curve, we are growing here, or we're growing sugar, at least as a factor 2, if not 3, higher than what you can do in other places. That is true for Brazil, but it's true for places in Asia as well. That's why our sugar production has vanished. It's a pure supply-demand. I talked about these market-based principles. At the end of the day, we can put up trade barriers for a while and do interesting things and subsidize things, but the market is clearing. At some point in time, what makes sense will dominate, and what doesn't make much sense, unfortunately, will have to go. So biofuels will play a relatively important role.
But don't you think Brazil's going to have to face the sugarcane growing?
That's a very good point that is being heavily discussed in the literature, which is interesting you've heard lots of arguments around it. When you look at the theory of the case, and I go to the practice as well, in the theory of the case, we can more than triple the current sugarcane production with pasture lands not going into any rainforest or even making any negative difference on CO2 production. So there is so much land in Brazil. I mean, just look at the map, and the map unfortunately twists Brazil a little bit, so the acreage that is available in Brazil is unbelievable. Now, there is unfortunately an issue of who's owning that land and how easy it is to deforest rainforest and how close that is logistically and some other very practical things where the market is what we would call detorted right now because the government is not doing what it should be doing. So that will be a very important thing in your visit to have a discussion and try to understand those dynamics a little bit more. Yeah, I hope this was interesting. Come to the end of my time here. Wish you good luck. Again, coming back to the beginning of my presentation, it's really worth studying, so do well, and I wish you good luck for that. Thank you.
Those of you that have 10 o'clock.